See, the person that God uses has a burden for God's people. God began to work in Nehemiah's life because Nehemiah was concerned about the things that God would be concerned about. And as we talk about allowing God to use our lives for His will to move in and through us, the first thing that we see is that the person that God uses has a burden for the things of God. Look, there are a lot of burdens in the world. There are a lot of needs in the world. There are people who are homeless and hungry, people who are in the midst of broken relationships, people who are struggling with addiction, children who aren't being educated properly. There's incredible economic disparity. The world is divided politically, ideologically, theologically. There are all kinds of needs in the world. There are all kinds of things that we can be burdened with. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is that one of the things that leads us from conviction and action is the temptation to be overcome and overwhelmed by apathy because we think that we aren't enough. We can't do enough to meet all the needs in the world. And so oftentimes we are distracted from the one need that God is convicting us and drawing our hearts to. I want to think about how this principle plays out in our life. And we can look at a little bit of a lighter illustration of how this principle plays out. And it just happened to me just this week. The other night I was driving home and I was driving Sarah's vehicle and her little light came on that told me the engine coolant was hot. And so I knew I needed to stop and get some more engine coolant. And her car was a little low on gas anyway, so I stopped and filled it up and went in and got some coolant. I took it home and I thought about replacing it then, but I thought, no, the engine's hot, I'll wait until it cools down. So I just took the can of coolant and I put it in the garage right in the middle of the floor so that first thing in the morning I would look at it and remind me when the engine's cool, go and refill her coolant. Well, I woke up the next morning and I remembered without having to be reminded that the coolant needed to be refilled. So I went into the garage and was about to replace the coolant, refill the coolant in her engine. Well, at the same time, we're also doing some house projects and working on some things that need to be done and fixed up over the summertime. And I walked into the garage. I noticed it was covered with a decent amount of sawdust. There were tools that were out of place. There were supplies that were all over. And so I started to work on some of those things, started to clean out the garage, started to organize a little bit and reset. And I spent a couple hours doing it, and I got really hot and decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go get a glass of water and sit down. And as soon as I went inside and got a glass of water and kind of caught my breath a little bit, guess what I realized I had not done? Refilled the coolant in Sarah's car. See, the very thing that I was convicted to go out and do and fix is the one thing that went undone because I got distracted by a bunch of other needs. And I think as we think about allowing God to use us for His purposes, allowing His will to flow through us, one of the things God needs is people who are burdened for the things of His heart. And one of the things that I think can be a temptation for us or a potential trap for us is that we can become so overwhelmed by all the things that need to be done that we forget to do the one thing God is drawing our attention to. In fact, in our small group last Sunday night as we gathered for ice cream and conversation, we were talking about that passage in Matthew where Jesus is talking to the righteous. And these individuals were identified as being righteous because Jesus said, when I was in prison, you came and visited me. And when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. And when I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. And the people said, well, wait a minute, Lord, when did we see you in prison or see you hungry or see you thirsty? And Jesus said, you know what? When you did it for one of my followers, you did it for me. And as we sat there and talked about that passage, we were struck by that word, one, the power of that word, one. When you did that one faithful thing, you did it for me. See, I think we fall into a trap of thinking we need to do everything, or being overwhelmed by all the needs of the world. Jesus isn't calling one of His followers to fix all the needs of the world. Jesus is calling all of His followers to address the one thing that He convicts them with and puts before their heart. One thing at a time. And I think one of the things that leads us from action and conviction to apathy and inaction is being overwhelmed by all the needs. You know, there were a lot of issues in the world during Nehemiah's life. But he found the one thing, the reason God used him in a powerful way is he was able to identify the one thing, the one issue that God was calling him to address.